thank the witnesses for your appearance today. Drug prices are rising every day, and the burden is being felt most acutely at the lowest level, the consumer. Yes, this problem is complex and unwieldy, and with a variety of competing interests. And it seems that these competing interests threaten any incentive to keep costs down. Lack of competition in the market is driving prices up, and everyday Americans are paying a higher and higher amount for life-saving medications. Mrs. Morton, do you believe that the American government is utilizing our antitrust protections in the drug pricing chain properly?
No.
Why do you think antitrust enforcement has weakened?
The answer to that is probably longer than we have time today. But Mr. Cadis's remarks about the CREATES Act, about defending pay for delay, citizens' petitions, blocking of biosimilar entry in various ways, all of these are potentially anti-competitive behavior that the FTC could go after, but the FTC is limited by the court's negative views of antitrust enforcement, the limits of the FTC on nonprofits, and other areas that are highlighted in his testimony. I think Congress could fix many of those things.
So more laws and more regulations would be the fix?
I think more laws making it clear what the antitrust law is supposed to capture and giving the FTC authority to go after those cases.
No, it wasn't the Affordable Care Act passage that caused this dilemma, is it?
No.
And in fact, the tens of millions of people who were brought into the healthcare system upon passage of the Affordable Care Act, that is not the cause of of consolidation in the insurance and the hospital industries and in terms of the high cost of prescription drugs. Is that correct?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Well, let me ask you this question about prescription drugs. Federal law prohibits itself from negotiating with drug manufacturers over the cost of prescription drugs for Medicare Part D enrollees. Would removing this handcuff result in lower costs for Medicare Part D employees and the Medicare program?
Medicare Part D is run as an outsourced, privatized program where insurance companies negotiate with drug manufacturers. So they do pretty well. They have a formulary. They can walk away. I think it's very difficult for the Secretary of Health and Human Services to walk away from a drug manufacturer and say, I'm sorry, drug A will not be available to anybody, any of America's seniors. That's a hard thing to say. It's not very credible. Whereas an individual insurance company can say, oh, we're going to put drug A low, on a high tier with a high copay, and drug B is going to be our preferred drug. So I think Part D works pretty well. It's Part B that's really not good.
You think the handcuffs on Part B should be removed?
Correct.
And that would lower cost for the 15% of consumers enrolled in that program?
Well, we all pay the taxes for it.
Well, you're right about that. Well, let me ask you this question also. With respect to consolidation in the health insurance industry, would passage of legislation that allowed for what's known as the public option, passage of that legislation, would it result in a competition that would lower prices for consumers?
The public option has a lot of different definitions, but certainly anything we can do to make the Affordable Care Act marketplaces more competitive with more choices for consumers, that would be a great help, and it would lead to lower prices.
Thank you. So the constant attempts to destroy the Affordable Care Act, which enabled tens of millions of people to have access to this system, don't do anything to cut the consolidation in the hospital and insurance industries or the rise in prescription drug prices. Do you all agree with that? Yes, 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 and yes?
Yes.
Okay, well, let the record show everybody agrees with that. And with that, I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensen.